Hello everyone. We'll give just a minute or two to let everyone in the conversation. How's everyone doing today? Feel free to drop your name and where you're from. Hi John. Hi Sarah. Hi Elizabeth, joining from New York. I'm glad you're here. Okay, just a few more seconds. Hi Mark, also joining from New York. Welcome. All right, let's get started so we can stay on track. So before we talk about friends, I want to talk about a moment that most people don't name. It's the moment where something stops being a dream and starts asking something of you. Dreaming is light. Dreaming floats. Decision has weight. Most people don't get stuck because they're afraid. They get stuck because they don't know what to do with that weight once it shows up. When this moment goes unnamed, people default to delay. They tell themselves, I'll think about it after this year, or I just need more clarity, or maybe it's just not the right time. And quietly, year after year, the decision doesn't go away, it just gets heavier. That weight accumulates. That's not procrastination. That's an unresolved decision asking for structure. Most people were never taught how to move from desire to commitment in complex life changes. This entire conversation exists to name that moment and to show you what kind of support actually helps once you're here. So sit with this question honestly. Is this the year, or is this just another year of thinking about it? I'm so glad you decided to join us today. I'm not here alone. We have Jen with us, who's our community manager. She's the one who keeps all of the loose ends in order. To get started, I want to tell you that this isn't a presentation about friends. There are plenty of those. This is a conversation about readiness. You know, readiness isn't a personality trait. It's not confidence. It's not clarity. It's a moment you arrive at. When people misunderstand readiness, they wait for it to feel different. They expect excitement without anxiety, clarity without friction, and certainty without commitment. So they stay parked. Readiness almost always arrives with discomfort. Anxiety doesn't mean you're not ready. Often it means something real is finally at stake. One of the roles of support is helping you distinguish productive discomfort from misalignment. That distinction changes everything. By the end of this presentation, you'll know which stage you're in and what to do from that stage. I'm not here to motivate you or pressure you. Motivation fades, but clarity lasts. Decisions based on motivation tend to collapse under complexity. When motivation drops, and it always does, people retreat. Clarity doesn't require excitement. It requires honesty. Support replaces motivation with structure, which is far more durable. So, here's a question for everyone. How long have you been thinking seriously about moving to France? Is it less than a year, 1 to 3 years, or more than 3 years? Just drop your answers in the conversation. Okay, John, less than a year. Mark, 2 years? Yeah, I see lots of 1 to 3 years. That's good, you're in the right place. Let me tell you a little about my experience moving to France. I'm not sharing this as a success story, but as context. In fact, my story isn't over. I continually work with the immigration office to maintain my status until I become a citizen. It's confusing, but absolutely possible. It has many messy edges, but it's absolutely worth it. When people only hear the polished outcomes, they underestimate the complexity of the middle, and that creates unrealistic expectations. Confusion is not incompetence. It's what happens when capable people enter unfamiliar systems. The right support doesn't replace agency, it protects it. During my project of moving from the US to France, I assumed, incorrectly, that it would be easy to find all of the information I needed to execute my plan in an organized way. I dealt with loads of confusion over the visa type I needed to request and what that decision would mean to me later on. And I lacked the right guidance for setting up my professional activity in France. That single topic alone cost me an enormous amount of time and money. But in the end, it all worked out. Yes, I would have done many things differently, but I learned some really valuable lessons. And now I can share those lessons with others to help them avoid the pitfalls and detours that will surely pop up. Now, I don't think struggle is noble. I think it's just common. I moved to France and figured things out as I went. Not because I wasn't capable, but because I didn't know any other way. Most of my mistakes didn't come from a lack of effort. They came from decisions being made in the wrong order and without context. And when those decisions stack, time leaks, money leaks, and energy drains. Then recovery becomes the work. This isn't about bad choices. It's about choices made too early or too late or in the wrong order. Support doesn't eliminate mistakes. It prevents compound mistakes. Let me give you a personal example. When I was setting up my professional activity, my immigration attorney referred me to a business expert. I trusted this recommendation and I followed the expert's advice. She told me to create a corporation. And it was completely wrong for my situation. I lost the money to open it, and then years later I paid again to close it. And the time, stress, and the administrative hassle of something that never needed to exist stayed with me for far longer than it should have. That wasn't a failure of intelligence. I didn't know what I didn't know. The French system is not necessarily more complicated than any other, it's just different. This was a failure of the right sequencing and of support. This is one of the quiet risks of doing this alone. So we have a new program, and it exists to help people move forward with more support and less unnecessary friction. Hard things are still going to be hard. Moving to a different country will never be simple. But here's something I want to call out clearly. Most of the difficulty people experience isn't because the process is impossible. It's because they're trying to interpret an unfamiliar system while they're already under emotional pressure. That combination, unfamiliar systems plus emotional weight, is where things start to fall apart. Just notice for yourself. You don't have to put it in the conversation unless you want to. When things get stressful, do you tend to get more clear or more scattered? I think for many, the answer is more scattered. And here's the part people underestimate. When you're doing this alone, every decision carries extra weight because you don't even know if you're asking the right question. So you over-research, you second-guess, and you delay. And delay has a quiet cost. Not dramatic and not obvious. It shows up as mental fatigue, loss of momentum, a sense that you're working on this but not actually moving forward. That's not laziness, that's cognitive overload. We're not talking about a failure of discipline or intelligence. This is what happens when capable people are dropped into systems they've never had to navigate before, in a different language and culture and bureaucracy. You're not supposed to instinctively know how it works. This is one of the first places where people misinterpret what's happening and think, yeah, maybe I'm not ready. When in reality, what they're missing isn't readiness, it's orientation. This is usually the first moment where support makes a meaningful difference. Not to push you forward, not to tell you what to do, but to help you understand what actually matters right now, what can wait, and what looks urgent but really isn't. This is the difference between effort and effective effort. Keep that in mind as we move into the stages because you'll start to see where support actually changes outcomes. Now let's talk about the stages of this process. People move through predictable stages, whether they name them or not. Without naming stages, people misjudge themselves. They think, I should be further along, but the stages aren't rankings, they're locations, a snapshot in time. Support helps you work with your stage instead of fighting it. The first stage is the dreamers. This stage isn't naive, it's persistent. The idea of moving to France keeps returning. Not loudly, but consistently. You notice how you feel when you're in France, you notice how you feel when you leave. France becomes a reference point, even when you're not actively planning anything. If that's crossed your mind more than once in the last year, just notice that. Here's what most people don't realize. When someone stays in the dreaming stage too long, the dream slowly changes shape. At first, it energizes you. Later, it becomes a quiet ache. You start wondering, why can't I let this go? Is something wrong with me for wanting this? Am I being unrealistic? And without support, people often do one of two things. They romanticize it endlessly, or they push it away and tell themselves it's impractical. Both are ways of avoiding the same thing, understanding what the dream is actually asking of them. This stage isn't about indecision, it's about listening to yourself. Dreams don't persist without reason, but they also don't automatically mean act now. The mistake some people make is thinking the only options are decide immediately or ignore it completely. There's a middle step most people skip. That middle step is interpretation. This is often the first place where support helps, quietly. Not to force a timeline, but to help you translate the dream into something grounded. Here's something I've noticed from experience. One of the most helpful early moves isn't logistical at all. It's finding real human connections in the place you're considering, someone who lives there now. If you're working on your French, it's essential that you have real conversations with native speakers. You can study all day, but it doesn't mean anything until you put it into practice. You can use a language sharing application like Conversation Exchange or one of the many others to find partners. On most of these sites, you can filter your search by gender, city, native speaker or not, etc. If you find someone in the city where you plan to move, you'll be operating at a different level. This is not to ask about visas, but instead to understand daily life. Where the best neighborhoods are, where the best bakeries are, where the best parks are, what to do on the weekend, etc. That single relationship could collapse months of aimless research into something real. That kind of orientation is hard to do alone and incredibly stabilizing. And I can tell you from personal experience that many of my language partners have become personal friends over the years. Stage 2 is for the planners. This is where most people feel the most productive and often the most stuck. You're researching visas, you're comparing cities, you're looking at budgets. From the outside, It looks like progress. And to be fair, some of it is. If you currently have more than 5 tabs open related to this stuff, you're probably here. Here's where things quietly go sideways. Planning feels responsible, and so it's rewarding internally. But without feedback or structure, planning can become a holding pattern. You keep gathering information because it feels safer than choosing. And over time, something subtle happens. Your confidence doesn't increase, and your questions don't narrow. They multiply. That's not because you're doing it wrong. It's because information without context creates more uncertainty, not less. This is where people often think, I just need one more piece of information. But that's rarely true. What they actually need is to know which questions matter now, which ones are for later, and which ones are distractions in disguise. This is a sequencing problem, not a motivation problem. And sequencing is almost impossible to do accurately when you're inside it alone. This is one of the clearest moments where support changes outcomes. Not by adding more information, but by helping you stop researching the wrong things. Here's a question I like to ask people at this stage. What would you stop researching today if you had to decide in 90 days? That question usually reveals where someone is hiding, not out of fear, but out of responsibility. This is where structure begins to matter more than curiosity. Here's another question for you. Which feels more familiar right now? I need more information, I need more clarity, I need structure and support. Let me know in the conversation if you want, and you can just say need information, need clarity, or need support. All right. Yeah, it looks like the majority of you are saying need clarity. That's good, but I find that sometimes people already have more clarity than they think. They just need someone to help them put all the pieces together. Stage 3 is when things become a bit more intense. This stage is the committed stage. And anxiety increases, not because something is wrong, but because something is real. The questions get heavier and the stakes become clearer. Decisions start demanding timelines. This is where many people retreat after investing years of thought. They convince themselves that waiting is safer. Anxiety here isn't danger, it's responsibility coming at you. Most people who arrive here are ready. They've already committed, even if only mentally and emotionally. This stage is all about follow-through, and this is where people either move or quietly retreat. This is the stage where support saves people from retreating back into the abstract. No one really talks about the emotional rhythm underneath this process. The logistics aren't what break people, the emotional rhythm does. When emotions are unnamed, people personalize them, like I'm bad at this or I'm not cut out for this. This is not a personal shortcoming, it's a transition pattern. Support names the rhythm so you don't mistake friction for failure. Now, almost everyone moves through the same emotional arc. Orientation, where things start to take shape. Friction, where there's confusion, bureaucracy, and doubt. Momentum, where decisions finally start stacking. And integration. This is when your plan starts to feel like your life. On paper, that looks really clean. In reality, it rarely is. Here's where people get derailed. Friction shows up, and they assume it means they've made a mistake. They think, this shouldn't be that hard. Maybe I'm misunderstanding something, or maybe I'm just not cut out for this. And because they're alone, there's no one to normalize what's happening. So they retreat, not dramatically, quietly. They slow down, they stop talking about it, they tell themselves that they'll revisit it later. That's how momentum dies, not with a crash, but with erosion. Friction doesn't mean failure. It just means you've moved past an idea into reality. Every meaningful transition has this phase. What matters is how you interpret the friction. If you read it as danger, you'll pull back, naturally. If you read it as data, you'll move forward. That difference is rarely instinctive. This is where support has the highest impact. Not to remove the friction, but to help you recognize it correctly. As someone who has already done it, I lived through this period. I knew, for example, as part of my visa requirement, that I would need a French bank account. I searched to find a French bank that would allow me to open an account online from the US, but I couldn't find any good solutions. And most of them wanted you to have a French address to open the account, but I couldn't have a French address without the French bank account. This is a fun, vicious cycle thing that they do here that you will surely encounter throughout this process. So I went to France for work, and I was armed with a letter from a French friend saying that I would stay with him in France until I found an apartment, so I could use his address. Then, after visiting several branches of the bank I had chosen around town, I ended up at the international branch. There, an agent told me that it must be done from the US. He gave me an email address to contact the right person, and I returned to the US after my work. When I made contact by email, that person told me that it had to be done in person, in France. So I thought, okay, this is going to be impossible. And if I'd been equipped with the right information from the start, I could have skipped all of the stress and wasted time and money. Throughout my process, it was small things like this that seemed like they should be simple that were the most overwhelming. That situation felt impossible, not because it was, but because I had to interpret it alone. With the right guidance, I would have known what was normal, what was temporary, and what didn't matter. Support doesn't make things easy, it makes them clear. And that clarity is what allows momentum to return. I want to be upfront about something. You will likely at some point feel overwhelmed. It's natural. And overwhelm often feels like falling behind. People panic and reset. They undo progress to feel safe again. But let me assure you, if you're overwhelmed, you haven't missed something. You've arrived at the real work. Support helps you stay with the work instead of backing away. So another question for you. Which phase feels closest to where you are right now? Orientation, friction, momentum, or integration? Just drop the word in the conversation. No judgment, just honesty to help provide you some clarity. Okay? I'm seeing all 4 answers, and that's positive. Hopefully you're starting to get a sense of where you are in the process. This clarity is critical for deciding the next steps. Now I'd like to introduce the Move Lab. The new Move Lab from our French Life Blueprint series exists for one stage, not all stages. It's not for dreamers, although that's where we all start, and we've got different resources to support that group. So even if you're seeing yourself in this group right now, just stick around a few more minutes to get access to our assessment application and the resources to meet you where you are. The Move Lab is not for the planners who want more information. These people are probably closer than they think, and we have resources for them too. If you think you're in this group, you should still complete the assessment application to get resources and continued information. The Move Lab, instead, is for people who have decided they're moving and don't want to do the hardest part alone. When the committed try to self-manage this phase, they burn energy fast. Needing support here is not dependence, it's strategy. This is where structure replaces spinning. Here's the structure of the program. This structure exists so you don't have to invent one while managing everything else. This isn't about speed, it's about fewer wrong turns. It's 12 weeks. We'll follow a flow chart of activities to keep you on track and help you avoid pitfalls and detours. There are weekly live calls, 60 to 90 minutes, to review the topic for the week and discuss any issues from the group. We'll have optional office hours, a weekly call for 60 minutes that any participant can join at will and ask questions or address concerns. This will be a small, intentional group. You'll be in a group with others who are living a shared experience with you for added support. Each group is application-based to ensure that you are working in a community of people at a similar stage. The price is a one-time payment of $995 or 3 monthly payments of $365. The program includes our French Life Blueprint Guide and Companion Workbook and lifetime access to the French Life Blueprint community and a private channel for your specific group. This will be helpful long after you've arrived in France. So let me just say that without continuity, people reinvent the wheel every week. Progress accelerates when decisions have context. The real value isn't the format. This isn't just a program, it's a continuity of people and perspective. Knowing people before you arrive changes the emotional landing. You're working alongside people who are making this transition with you. People you'll already know when you arrive in France. Human connection is infrastructure, and that changes everything emotionally. And yes, I genuinely mean this. I'm always happy to meet people when they arrive. I'll meet you at the airport to help you get settled if you want, or we can meet up the day after for coffee or a drink to talk through the first few weeks. That human continuity matters more than most people realize. And at the end of the program, you may not have booked your flight to France yet, but you will still have worked through the hardest parts with support. And you'll have the tools and continued support you need as you finalize your move. As I said, all participants of the Move Lab will also receive our French Life Blueprint Guide and Companion Workbook. The French Life Blueprint program, which independently sells for $99, contains all of the information, trackers, checklists, spreadsheets, and links you'll need to make your move with the least amount of stress. When people look at a move like this from the outside, it can feel overwhelming because everything appears to be happening at once. Visas, money, housing, language, work, bureaucracy, community. It looks like one massive tangled problem. What this slide shows is that it's not one giant thing. It's a sequence. Over the 12 weeks, we'll move through every major area of the move deliberately, in an order that actually makes sense. Nothing important is skipped, and nothing is handled in isolation. If you've ever thought, I don't even know where to start, this is why. Here's the part most people don't see until they're already in it. When you try to handle all of this alone, everything feels equally urgent, even when it isn't. So people jump ahead. They solve problems too early. And they make decisions without knowing how those decisions affect what comes next. That's how time gets lost. That's how money gets wasted. And that's how people end up feeling exhausted before they've even arrived. It's not because they're careless, it's because they're trying to hold too much in their head at once. This is not about being capable. It's about complexity. Moving to another country isn't just a logistical project, it's a layered transition. Each part of the process only really makes sense in context. When you handle things in the right order, decisions get lighter. When you handle them out of order, everything feels heavier than it needs to be. Most people don't need more information. They need help understanding when to focus on what and how it applies to their situation. And this is where support matters. Each week we'll focus on one core area of the move, not in theory, but in practice. Think of this as a 90-day challenge for your move. You're not just learning what's involved, you're working through how it applies to your visa path, your finances, your work situation, your timeline. And you're doing it alongside a small group of people dealing with the same transition. People you'll already know by the time you arrive in France. So by the end of this process, every major issue has been addressed. And more importantly, you've never had to interpret any of it alone. That's the difference between surviving a move like this and actually settling into it. When people hear 12-week program, the first thing many of them imagine is a heavy workload or a long to-do list. So I want to make this very concrete and very human. This slide shows what one actual week in the Move Lab looks like, using week 1 as the example. Week 1 isn't about doing everything. It's about getting oriented to yourself, to the group, and to how the program works. If you've ever joined something and thought, I already feel behind, this is designed to prevent that. And here's what often goes wrong when people try to do this alone. They start with logistics. They jump straight into visas and housing and money, and because they haven't oriented themselves yet, everything feels heavier than it needs to. They don't know what actually matters right now, what can wait, or how to pace themselves. That's how people burn energy early before the real work even begins. Week 1 is intentionally light, grounded, and clarifying. You're not being asked to solve your entire move. You're being asked to understand where you are, get familiar with the rhythm of the group, and start translating a vague idea into something more concrete. The goal isn't productivity here. The goal is orientation. When orientation is solid, everything that follows is easier. So here's what will typically happen in week 1. You'll attend the live group session where we walk through the process together and set the tone for the weeks ahead. There's also an optional shared office hour so you can ask questions or simply listen and realize, oh, other people are navigating the same things I am. You'll do a small amount of personal work, an initial vision exercise, messy at first and then refined, and the first section of the workbook, which is designed to clarify, not to overwhelm. And you introduce yourself inside the community space, not with pressure, but with context. By the end of the first week, the most important thing has happened. You're no longer holding this alone in your head. You know how the program works, you know who else is in the room, and you feel calmer and more oriented than when you started. That's what a successful week 1 looks like. Now, here's what the program is not about. This is not about more content consumption, although the program does include plenty of carefully compiled resources and information to guide you. It is not a noisy group full of people at various stages of the process. What it's really about is better decisions made sooner. Information without interpretation creates paralysis, and better decisions come from fewer inputs, not more. Support filters the noise so you can focus on what's really important. So what's the next step? The next step is applying to determine clearly where you are. It's asking whether this is the right program for you right now. Without a system, people loop back into thinking. The application is a series of quick questions designed to provide real clarity around the subject. And to be clear, the application is not a commitment to the program. It's just clarification for you. And even being redirected is progress. So I encourage everyone to apply with the assessment, no matter where you think you are. This is how we'll connect you to the resources that fit your situation, whatever that is. And everyone who completes the assessment will also have an opportunity to join our French Life Blueprint community. Every application will be reviewed personally. The applications will generally be reviewed within 2 days, and you'll be emailed with a decision. At that point, you'll either be invited to join the program or be redirected to other resources that might be more appropriate for your current situation. We review the applications personally to ensure that we're doing a service to you and to anyone else accepted into the group. Automated funnels remove that nuance, but these questions are designed to give us more insight into your perspective. This is intentional selection for you and for the group. It's about fit, and that fit protects everyone's experience. So if you're ready to apply, you can follow the link on the screen and complete the application today. I want to thank you for showing up honestly today. Whether you apply or not, I hope this helped you see yourself and your next step more clearly. Before we open things up for questions, I want to share one more thing. Doing nothing is still a decision. Continuing alone is still a path. And waiting has a cost, even when it feels neutral. I didn't use a program like this when I moved. I made decisions out of order, followed advice that didn't fit, and spent time and money untangling things that never needed to happen. This isn't about avoiding difficulty. It's about avoiding unnecessary friction. If you made it this far, the next step is to apply. Not to convince yourself, but to decide in context. Now, I'm happy to answer questions about the structure, the experience, and whether this is the right fit in principle. I won't be answering individual visa or personal case questions here. Those deserve their proper context. So if you have questions regarding the program, its structure, or the expected experience, fire away. How do I know if someone is ready? Okay, that's a good question, and it's one that I take seriously. Readiness isn't about confidence or certainty. Most people who are ready are actually a little anxious. What we're looking for is movement, a timeline forming, real decisions starting to press in, and a sense that doing this alone no longer feels like the right approach. If someone is still mostly curious or gathering information, that's not wrong, it's just earlier. This program is for the moment when the question shifts from could I to how do I move forward? Okay, what if I realize I'm not ready? Okay, that happens more often than people expect, and it's not a failure. Sometimes clarity comes through commitment, not before it. If someone realizes they're not as ready as they thought, then the work shifts. Instead of pushing forward, you got to slow down and get honest about what's actually in the way. That insight alone is valuable. It prevents another year of vague effort or self-pressure. The goal isn't to force progress. It's to replace confusion with clarity, even if that clarity changes the timeline. How hands-on is the hands-on support? It's hands-on in the places that matter and intentionally hands-off in others. So I'm not here to micromanage or to tell you exactly what to do, but I'm very present when it comes to interpreting what's happening, pressure testing your decisions, helping you sequence things so you're not solving the wrong problem first. Think of it less like instruction and more like guidance at the moments where people usually get stuck or start second-guessing themselves. There are many things to manage, even after you move. And unless you're proficient in French, the letters and emails you receive can be intimidating. That's one point where support really pays off. Having someone to help you navigate the administration and clarify what's really important from what's noise reduces an incredible amount of stress. What does success look like if I join the program? Success isn't just one specific outcome, and I'm careful about promising a single version of progress. What you will see is this. You'll be clear. Your decisions will feel grounded instead of overwhelming. Timelines will stop being abstract, and the move will feel more real than hypothetical. For some people, that means concrete logistics are underway. For others, it means they finally know what they're saying yes to or no to. Either way, they're no longer stuck in the fog. What is the time commitment? This is not designed to take over your life. Most people will spend time on the weekly live call each week, plus potentially a few additional hours applying what we've discussed to their situation. And this is just going to depend on your timeline for moving. The real shift isn't time spent, it's reducing or eliminating the mental load. So when you stop spinning and second guessing, you actually get time back because you're no longer circling around questions over and over again. Why not just do it alone? You can. I did. But when I think back on all of the time and money I wasted, I wish I had done it differently. There's plenty of information out there. In fact, too much. I can't even calculate how much time I spent going down rabbit holes just to find several different answers to the same question. Research is really useful until it isn't. The limitation of doing this alone isn't a lack of information. It's a lack of context and sequencing and perspective. And most mistakes don't happen because people didn't research. They happen because they solved the wrong problem at the wrong time or followed advice that didn't fit their situation. So this isn't about giving you more information, although we'll give you all the basic information that you need. It's about helping you make better decisions sooner with support when things feel unclear. Okay, so if there's nothing else, I think we're going to wrap it up here. I want to thank you again for joining. If you're ready to apply, follow the link and let's get started. Hopefully I'll see you soon. Bye for now.